I took the job at Silver Verge Mine because I was desperate. That's the only honest way to say it. My father's medical bills had piled up like ore in a cart, crushing, immovable, impossible to ignore. The cancer took him in 6 months, but the debt he left behind was going to take years. Construction work in Reno wasn't cutting it, not with what I owed. So when I saw the posting for miners at an old Nevada shaft with competitive hazard pay, I applied the same day. The drive out to Silver Verge took me 2 hours east into the kind of desert that looks like God started creating it and then got bored. Scrub brush dotted the beige landscape like stubble on a corpse. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp enough to cut the pale sky. The GPS lost signal about 40 minutes in, but the road only went one direction, deeper into nothing. When I finally saw the mine complex, it looked exactly like what it was, a wound in the earth that someone had decided to reopen. The main headframe stood skeletal against the afternoon sun, rusted steel beams forming a tower over the shaft entrance. Around it, a scatter of buildings, some original structures from decades past, weathered and listing, others new prefab units that gleamed white and out of place. The contrast was jarring. Modern money is trying to extract value from very old ground. I parked near the supervisor's office and grabbed my duffel. The wind hit me immediately, carrying dust and the smell of hot rock. In the distance, I could hear the rhythmic clank of metal on metal, the whine of machinery, and the shouted directions of men working. It sounded normal, industrial, safe. I should have known better. The foreman, Harlan Briggs, met me outside the office. He was maybe 60, lean as rebar, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same rock he spent his life digging through. His handshake was solid, his eyes pale and assessing. "Noah Reyes?" he asked. "That's me. You ever worked underground before?" "No, sir." "Construction above ground, concrete, steel, heavy equipment." He nodded slowly like he'd expected that answer. "Underground's different. You listen to the rock, you respect the dark, and you follow procedure. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good. We'll start you on the night shift. Pays better and we need the bodies." He turned and gestured for me to follow him toward the headframe. "Come on. I'll show you the shaft before you get settled in the barracks." We walked across the compound past stacks of drilling pipe and pallets of equipment. Other miners, day shift I assumed, moved around us with the efficient silence of men who'd done the same tasks 1,000 times. Nobody looked at me with curiosity or welcome. I was just another set of hands. The shaft entrance yawned before us, a perfect circle of absolute black framed by concrete and timber. Rails ran into it for the ore carts, and beside them stood the elevator cage. A rattling metal box with accordion gates and cable thick as my wrist disappearing into the dark above and below. "Silver Verge was first dug in the 1890s, Harlan said, his voice taking on the practiced tone of a speech he'd given many times. "Silver and gold. Played out by the 1920s, reopened in the 50s, shut down again in the 70s after a bad cave-in. The company I work for now bought the mineral rights 2 years ago. We're doing exploratory drilling, checking if modern techniques can extract what the old-timers left behind." "Is it stable?" I asked, looking at the darkness. "Stable enough if you follow the rules." He pulled a laminated card from his shirt pocket and handed it to me. "Standard safety protocols are in your orientation packet. This is different. This is for the night shift specifically." I took the card. It was the size of a playing card, edges worn and smudged with rock dust. The text was typed in a plain font, some lines crisp, others slightly faded like they'd been added at different times. "Silver Verge night shift. Underground rules. Rule 1. Do not descend past level 4 after 11:13 p.m., even if ordered over the radio. Rule 3. If you hear knocking that doesn't match your hammer blows, do not answer it. Rule 5. When walking the main drift, follow your own cap lamp. Ignore any second light that appears beside you. Rule 7. If a voice calls your name from an unlit crosscut, respond, "You're not on my crew," and keep walking. I read it twice, then looked up at Harlan. Is this a joke? Some kind of hazing for the new guy? His expression didn't change. No. Come on. Don't answer knocking. Ignore a second light. This reads like a campfire story. It reads like the difference between going home and not going home. Harlan took the card back, studied it for a moment, then returned it to me. You can believe what you want, Reyes. Most new guys think it's bullshit. But those rules have more survivors than any safety handbook the company ever printed. Follow them, and you'll collect your paycheck. Ignore them. He shrugged. Well, we've had turnover. I wanted to laugh, but something in his voice stopped me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't winking. He was stating facts with the same flat certainty he'd used to describe the mine's history. What happened in the cave-in? I asked. The one in the 70s? Harlan's jaw tightened. Lower level collapsed, sealed it off. That's all you need to know for now. He glanced at his watch. Day shift ends at 6. Night crew descends at 6:30. You'll be working level 3 mostly and some level 4. Good rock, well bolted. You'll be with experienced guys tonight. Just watch, learn, and do what you're told. And follow the rules, I said, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Especially follow the rules. He turned away, then paused. One more thing, Reyes. Underground, your shift is your crew. If someone's not on your crew, they're not your problem. You remember that and you'll be fine. He walked back toward the office, leaving me standing at the edge of that black shaft with a laminated card full of impossible instructions, and a sinking feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the depth of the hole before me. By 6:30 that evening, I was geared up in a hard hat with a cap lamp, a heavy belt with a battery pack, steel-toed boots, and a radio clipped to my chest. The night crew was smaller than I'd expected. Only 6 of us total, including Harlan. The others introduced themselves with nods. Luis, an electrician, Thomas and Ray, drillers, and Marcus, who ran the equipment. They all had the same weathered look, the same economy of movement. We loaded into the cage. The gate clanged shut with a sound like a cell door. Harlan punched a button and the elevator shuddered, then began to drop. The descent was slow, jerking, accompanied by the squeal of cable and the rattle of the gate. My cap lamp beam hit the shaft walls, sliding past, wet rock, old timber, occasional bolts and brackets from decades of mining. The air grew cooler, damper, heavier. The surface sounds faded, replaced by the mechanical groan of our descent and the steady drip of water somewhere in the dark. We passed level 1, then level 2, then level 3, where the cage finally lurched to a stop. Harlan opened the gate and we stepped out into a horizontal tunnel, the main drift carved through solid rock. Support timbers framed the passage every few yards, and strings of work lights cast pools of harsh illumination between stretches of shadow. Reyes, you're with Luis tonight, Harlan said. Inspection and bolt checks on 3. Stay in the main drift and the marked crosscuts. You see a tunnel without a reflective marker, you don't go in. Clear? Clear. Luis, a compact man in his 40s with kind eyes, handed me a hammer. Come on, new guy. I'll show you what to listen for. As the others dispersed into the tunnel system with their tasks, Luis led me along the drift, our cap lamps swinging, our boots crunching on loose stone. The tunnel was maybe 8 feet high and 10 feet wide, walls rough and irregular. Side passages branched off every 100 feet or so, crosscuts leading to old stopes or storage areas. Bolt checks are simple, Luis explained, stopping beneath a ceiling support. You tap each bolt with your hammer. Solid bolt sounds like this. He demonstrated a clear, high ring. Loose bolt sounds dull or rattles. You find a loose one, you mark it and report it. Got it? Got it. We worked our way down the drift, Luis teaching me the rhythms and sounds of the underground. Despite the strangeness of the rules, despite the weight of the rock above us, the work itself was straightforward, physical, real. For a while, I let myself believe that Harlan's rules were just superstition, the kind of folklore that grows in any isolated, dangerous workplace. I told myself I'd taken a strange job in a strange place, but it was still just a job. That belief lasted until about 10:45, when I learned that some knocks answer back. Around 10:30, Luis got called back to the main station to check a ventilation fan that was running rough. He left me in a short side tunnel off the main drift. Just a 30-foot stub that dead-ended at the rock face, lined with old cable brackets and a stack of unused timber. "Finish checking these last bolts," he said, gesturing at the ceiling supports. "Then meet me back at the station. Don't wander off." "I won't." He disappeared down the main drift, his lamp beam swinging away until I was alone with my own light in the silence of the rock. I set to work, tapping bolts with my hammer in a steady rhythm. Tap, pause, listen, tap, pause, listen. Each one rang clear, the sound echoing briefly in the confined space before being swallowed by the stone. The work was meditative, almost calming. Just me and the mountain, a simple test of metal and rock. I was 3/4 through when I paused to wipe sweat from my forehead. In that moment of silence, I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, hollow, coming from deeper in the rock, somewhere beyond the dead-end wall. I froze, hammer still raised. The sound hadn't come from the main drift behind me. It had come from ahead, from solid rock where no tunnel existed. My first thought was echo. Maybe someone working on another level, the sound traveling through the stone in strange ways. But the knocks hadn't matched my rhythm. They'd come after I'd stopped, as if in response, as if something was answering. I stood there for a long moment, listening to my own breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere in the darkness. The rational part of my brain cycled through explanations. Thermal expansion causing rock to pop, settling from old mining, equipment vibration traveling through the stone. The other part of my brain remembered Rule 3. If you hear knocking that doesn't match your hammer blows, do not answer it. I lowered my hammer slowly. My instinct, the deeply human instinct to respond, to communicate, to not be rude to something trying to make contact, urged me to knock back. Just once, just to see, to prove it was nothing. My hand twitched upward. I stopped myself, forced my arm down, turned away from the rock face and started walking back toward the main drift, my heart beating faster than it should have been. Behind me, from the dead-end wall I'd just left, came 3 more knocks. Faster this time, harder, like someone striking a stone with frustration. I didn't look back. I kept walking, my lamp beam fixed straight ahead on the rough tunnel floor. The sound of my boots seemed too loud, each step echoing and re-echoing until I couldn't tell how many feet were moving. When I reached the junction with the main drift, I finally let myself glance over my shoulder. The side tunnel stretched behind me, empty except for shadows and the faint gleam of cable brackets. But just before I turned away, I saw it. A flicker of orange light at the far end at chest height, like a second cap lamp hovering in the darkness where no one stood. Then it blinked out. I stood at the junction, breathing hard, telling myself it was nothing. Dust in my eyes. A reflection from my own lamp off some shiny mineral deposit. The mind plays tricks in isolation in the dark, but my hands were shaking. I found Luis at the ventilation station, elbow deep in a fan housing. He looked up when my lamp beam hit him. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." I almost told him. almost described the knocking, the light. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe not wanting to sound crazy on my first night. Instead, I just said, "I'm good. Bolts are all solid back there." Luis studied me for a moment longer, then nodded and returned to his work. "You'll get used to it down here. The dark, the quiet. Plays with your head at first." I wanted to ask him if he'd ever heard knocking that didn't come from any hammer, if he'd ever seen lights that weren't attached to any head. But I didn't. I just picked up a wrench and helped him secure the fan housing, grateful for something concrete to do with my hands. We worked together for another hour, moving through the main drift and checking various systems, ventilation curtains, water lines, ground wires for the equipment. The radio crackled periodically with check-ins from other crew members. Harlan on level 2, Thomas and Ray down on 4 running drill tests. Everything was normal, routine. The kind of industrial work I'd done 1,000 times above ground, just with more rock overhead. But I couldn't shake the memory of those 3 answering knocks, or the orange light at the tunnel's end. When we finally rode the cage back to the surface at 2 a.m., stepping out into the cold desert air under a sky full of stars, I felt a relief so profound it made my knees weak. The wind tasted like freedom. The open space felt like a blessing. In the barracks, I lay on my bunk and pulled out the laminated rule card, reading it again by flashlight. Rule 3 didn't say why you shouldn't answer a knock that doesn't match yours. It didn't explain what happens if you do. It just said, don't. I'd followed it, barely, by instinct more than belief. But now, with the memory of those hollow booms still echoing in my head, I wasn't so quick to dismiss the other rules as superstition. Because whatever had knocked back at me from inside solid rock, it hadn't sounded like settling stone or thermal expansion. It had sounded deliberate, purposeful, like something testing whether I would play along. I worked 3 more shifts before I met Derek Lyons, and in those 72 hours, I started to learn the mind's rhythms. The rattle of the cage, the particular echo of the main drift, the way your own lamp beam could trick you if you swung your head too fast. I cataloged each sound, each visual artifact, trying to build a rational framework around what I'd experienced in that side tunnel. I didn't hear the knocking again, didn't see any phantom lights. Started to convince myself I'd overreacted. Then Derek arrived and everything escalated. He came on shift my 4th night, replacing Marcus, who'd gone home to deal with a family emergency. Derek was maybe 25, built like he spent his off time at the gym, with the kind of swagger that comes from being good at something and knowing it. He'd been working underground for about a year, longer than me, but not long enough to have the caution I saw in veterans like Harlan and Luis. We were assigned together for a level 4 inspection, checking cable runs and ventilation curtains along the deep drift. Level 4 was the lowest active level, the last stop before the sealed sections that no one talked about much. The air was heavier down there, the rock closer, the silence more complete. As we geared up on the surface, Derek caught sight of my rule card tucked into my shirt pocket. "Oh man, you actually keep that thing?" He laughed, a big booming sound. "What is it, like your security blanket?" Harlan said to follow it. Harlan's old school. These rules are just scare tactics to keep new guys from cutting corners or wandering into unsafe areas. Derek pulled out his own card, crumpled and coffee-stained, and made a show of tossing it in a trash bin near the cage. "Watch. I've been down here a year. Never followed that superstitious bullshit. Still got all my fingers and toes." I wanted to tell him about the knocking, about the light. But Luis was right there, and Thomas and I didn't want to sound like I was pushing ghost stories. So I just pocketed my card and followed Derek into the cage. The descent to level 4 took longer. We passed through 1, then 2, then 3, each level a landing with rails and lights and the mouth of a drift tunnel. But level 4, when we finally jerked to a stop, felt different, colder. The work lights were spaced farther apart, leaving longer stretches of shadow. The ceiling was lower, the walls closer. It felt like being swallowed. "Come on," Derek said, checking his gear. "We've got about 2 hours of work. Stick close, don't touch anything stupid, and we'll be done before midnight." We started along the main drift, our cap lamp sweeping the rough walls. Our assignment was simple: walk the main passage, check the ventilation curtains at each crosscut, and verify the cable runs were secure and undamaged. Routine inspection. For the first 30 minutes, it was exactly that. We moved in silence, occasionally exchanging brief comments about what we found. Derek worked efficiently. I had to give him that. He knew his job, but as we got deeper into the drift, farther from the cage station, I started to notice something odd. There were 2 lights, not just our cap lamps crossing and overlapping as we worked. There was a third light, steady and orange, that appeared at the edge of my vision. I'd see it in my peripheral vision, just a glow like another headlamp, pacing us along the tunnel wall to my left. But when I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing. Just rock and shadow. I stopped walking. "Derek, you see that?" He was ahead of me, examining a vent curtain. "See what?" "There's..." I swung my head, trying to catch the light again. For a moment I saw it, a steady orange glow about 5 feet off the ground, 15 feet to my left, keeping pace even though I'd stopped moving. "There's another light, like a headlamp, but..." Derek turned, his beam sweeping over me and the wall beyond. "Where?" The light vanished, just an empty tunnel where I'd been pointing. It was right there. I saw it. Derek walked back to me, a grin spreading across his face. "Dude, it's just bounce from my lamp, or yours. The rock's full of mica and quartz. Catches light weird sometimes. You'll see all kinds of shit down here if you're looking for it." "I'm not looking for it." "Then don't worry about it." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Come on, we've got 6 more curtains to check." We kept moving, but I couldn't shake the awareness of that third light. It appeared and disappeared as we walked. Never quite where I was looking, always in the periphery. And the more I paid attention, the more I noticed a pattern. It appeared when we passed certain areas, unbolted sections of wall, old survey markers, places where the rock looked darker, wetter, like it was seeping something more than water. I was about to mention it again when our radios crackled to life. "Derek, Noah, this is Briggs." But the voice was distorted, stretched thin by static. "Derek, I need you to step into crosscut C and check for a gas leak. We're getting readings on the monitor." Derek stopped, unclipping his radio. "Copy that. Which one's C?" "100 yards ahead on your left, marked with red paint. Check the seals." "On it." Derek clipped the radio back and grinned at me. "Finally, something interesting. Come on." But something felt wrong. Harlan's voice on the radio had sounded off. Not just the static, but the cadence, the phrasing. And I hadn't heard any alert tones that would accompany a real gas warning. We reached the crosscut, a narrower tunnel branching left from the main drift, its entrance marked with faded red paint on the timber frame. No lights. Just darkness extending back into the mountain. Derek pulled out his gas monitor and stepped toward the entrance. That's when I saw the third light clearly for the first time. It was floating in the crosscut, maybe 20 feet, back from the entrance, orange and steady like a cap lamp. But there was no head beneath it, no body, no person. Just the light hovering at chest height, motionless. As Derek approached, the light began to drift deeper into the tunnel, slowly, like it was leading the way. "Derek, wait." But he was already stepping into the crosscut, his own lamp beam sweeping the walls. "Relax, man. It's probably just a bad seal. I'll be 2 minutes." He walked forward, following the drifting orange light, and disappeared around a bend in the tunnel. I stood at the entrance, my heart hammering. Everything in me wanted to follow him. That's what you do with a crew member, you stick together. But I was also remembering Rule 5. When walking the main drift, follow your own cap lamp. Ignore any second light that appears beside you. The radio crackled again. This time, Harlan's voice came through clean and sharp, no static. "Noah, Derek, where the hell are you? I told you to stay in the main drift on 4, report your position." I grabbed my radio. "We're at Crosscut C. You told Derek to check for gas." "I did no such thing. I'm on level 2. I haven't called anyone in the last 20 minutes. The words hit me like cold water. If Harlan was on 2 and hadn't given any orders, then who or what had spoken through the radio? A low grinding sound rolled through the tunnel like rock shifting deep in the earth. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lights dimmed for a moment, then steadied. "Derek!" I shouted into the crosscut. "Derek, get out of here!" No answer, just the settling silence and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the dark. I took one step toward the crosscut entrance. The orange light was gone now, vanished deeper into the tunnel. I could see Derek's lamp beam, distant and wavering far back in the passage. Then it went out. "Derek!" The radio hissed with static. Harlan's voice. "Noah, get back to the cage, now!" Every instinct screamed at me to run into that crosscut, to find Derek, to help. But I also remembered what Harlan had said on my first day. Underground, your shift is your crew. If someone's not on your crew, they're not your problem. I backed away from the crosscut, my lamp beam fixed on that black entrance. Backed all the way to the main drift, then turned and ran toward the cage station, my boots pounding on stone, my breath ragged. Behind me, from deep in Crosscut C, I heard 3 slow knocks echo through the rock. Then nothing. They searched for Derek for 3 days. I wasn't part of the search crew. Harlan kept me on surface duty, cataloging equipment and filing paperwork. But I heard the reports. They went into Crosscut C with full gear, gas monitors, reinforcement, and lights. They found his hard hat about 50 feet in, near a section where the tunnel narrowed. No blood, no signs of struggle, no Derek. The crosscut ended another 100 feet beyond that in a collapse of old rock and timber, completely impassable. According to the maps, it had been a dead end for decades, sealed after a partial cave-in in the 1960s. There was nowhere Derek could have gone. On the 4th day, the search was suspended due to ground stability concerns. The official report listed him as a probable cave-in victim, even though there was no evidence of recent collapse. The company issued a statement about the tragedy and safety reviews. Derek's family was notified, and the mine kept running. I couldn't let it go. In my off hours, I started digging into Silver Verge's history, trying to understand what I'd seen, what had taken Derek. The foreman's office had a filing cabinet full of old records. Most people didn't bother with it. But no one stopped me when I spent an afternoon going through dusty folders and brittle paper. What I found made my blood run cold. The oldest maps dated back to the 1890s, hand-drawn and faded. They showed the original shaft and the upper levels. But there were other maps too, from the 1950s and 60s, drawn by company surveyors. These showed additional levels below level 4, areas labeled lower winds and deep stope, with passages extending far deeper into the mountain than the current operations reached. Many of these lower sections were marked with red X's. Beside them in faded pencil, someone had written collapsed or sealed or simply no. One particular section directly below our current level 4 was circled multiple times. Next to it, old winds, collapsed 1972, do not enter, 1972. The year Harlan had mentioned when the bad cave-in happened. I dug deeper, looking for incident reports from that year. Found a thin folder marked 1972 safety incidents. Inside were typed forms on yellowed paper documenting the usual litany of minor injuries and equipment failures. But clipped to the back was a handwritten report, barely legible, signed by someone named Josiah Pike, night shift supervisor. The date was March 15, 1972. The report described a catastrophic ground failure in the lower winds during night operations. 11 men had been working down there when the rock let go. The collapse had been total, hundreds of tons of stone filling the passages, blocking all access. No bodies recovered. The decision was made to seal the level permanently rather than risk further lives trying to dig them out. 11 men, buried alive, were never brought home. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, the old paper trembling in my hands. Below the incident report, someone, maybe Pike, maybe someone else, had paperclipped a small personal notebook. The cover was water-stained and cracked. Inside, in the same handwriting as the report, were pages of observations that read, "Less like official documentation and more like field notes from someone trying to make sense of the impossible." I read them by the dusty light coming through the office window, my mouth going dry. November 3rd, 1972, 8 months since the collapse. Night crew reporting strange sounds from sealed sections. Knocking, regular and rhythmic like someone working. Checked seals intact. Checked with the day shift. They hear nothing. Only at night. November 17th, 1972, radio interference increasing. Men receive garbled transmissions that sound like orders, but no one on the surface is sending. Cross-checked all frequencies. Phenomena are isolated to the underground. December 2nd, 1972, Tommy Vickers went missing from level 3. Last seen heading toward the old shaft entrance to the winds, found his lamp and belt near the seal. Nobody. His wife insists she heard his voice on the hardline phone at home last night, telling her he was still working the night shift. The line was disconnected 3 months ago. December 10th, 1972, establishing new protocols. If it's not on your crew manifest, don't respond to it. If it calls from the dark, don't answer. If a light appears that isn't on someone's head, don't follow it. These rules aren't superstition, they're survival. The entries continued for months, documenting a slow accumulation of impossible events. Phantom lights in sealed tunnels, voices on dead phone lines, tools found in areas no one could access. And throughout, Pike kept refining his list of rules, testing what worked and what didn't through the grim metric of who came home and who didn't. The final entry was dated April 1973. I don't think they died in that collapse. I think they just fell into a different shift, same mine, different level. And now, they're still down there, still working, still trying to finish whatever job they started. Sometimes the levels overlap. Sometimes our shift and theirs run in the same space, just separate. The rules keep us from crossing over. The rules keep us on our shift. I've added them to the official safety protocols. No one above ground believes me, but the night crews know. They've seen what happens when someone breaks the rules. They join the other crew, and they don't come back. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking. The laminated card in my pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Josiah Pike had figured it out almost 50 years ago, and his rules had survived, modified, refined, passed down through generations of night crews. The card I carried was his legacy, a survival covenant written in the blood and disappearance of miners who'd learned the hard way. I returned to the mine that night for my shift, but I saw it differently now, not just as a hole in the ground, but as a layered space where multiple realities ran parallel. The living worked level 3 and 4. The dead worked the collapsed lower winds. And sometimes, in certain places at certain times, the boundaries between those shifts grew thin. When I descended in the cage that evening, I paid attention to the shaft walls sliding past. Between Level 3 and Level 4, I saw something I'd missed before. Old timbers framing what looked like a sealed opening in the shaft wall. Dark wood, ancient iron brackets, and rockfill. The entrance to the lower winds, right where 11 men had been buried alive in 1972. The cage dropped past it, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the underground air. I was descending through the boundary between the world of the living and whatever existed below. That night, working Level 3 with Luis, I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. Fresh gouges in the rock walls where no tools had been used recently. Handprints in the dust at heights no normal person could reach. An old canary cage hanging in a forgotten side tunnel, swinging gently in still air, even though there was no breeze. The other crew was all around us, working their eternal shift. We just couldn't see them. Usually, I found Harlan in the mess hall before our next shift, eating a silent meal at a corner table. The room was mostly empty. The day crew had already rotated out, and the rest of the night crew hadn't arrived yet. I walked over with my tray and sat down across from him without asking permission. He looked up, his pale eyes assessing me. "You've been reading the old files." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yeah. Found Josiah Pike's notebook. Found the report from 72. Harlan chewed slowly, then set down his fork. "And? Derek didn't die in a cave-in." My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. I kept them in my lap. "He followed something. That light in the crosscut and whatever spoke through the radio pretending to be you." Harlan was quiet for a long time. Then he pushed his tray aside and folded his hands on the table. In that moment, he looked older than I'd realized, not just weathered by years of physical labor, but worn down by something heavier. Knowledge. Grief. The weight of watching people disappear. "You want the truth?" he asked. "I think I've already got pieces of it. I just need someone to confirm I'm not crazy." He nodded slowly. "You're not crazy, I wish you were. Would make this easier." He glanced around the empty mess hall, then leaned forward. "The collapse in 72 was real. 11 men buried on the lower winds were never recovered. Bodies still down there under tons of rock and timber. Company sealed the level, wrote the checks to the families, moved on." "But," I prompted. "But about 3 months later, things started happening. Sounds from sealed areas, voices on dead phone lines. Men see lights where no lights should be." Josiah Pike was a night supervisor then. Smart man, practical, not the type to spook easily. He started documenting it, trying to find patterns, and he figured out that whatever those 11 men became when they died down there, they didn't stop working. I felt a chill despite the warm room. They're still down there, still on shift. That's Pike's theory. Mine too, for what it's worth. Harlan's voice was quiet, matter of fact. "This shaft runs more than one crew now. There's us, the living, working levels 3 and 4, and there's them, whatever they are, working the levels we sealed off. Most of the time, the two shifts stay separate. Different spaces, maybe even different times, I don't know. But sometimes, especially at night, the boundaries get thin. And when they do, the other crew tries to recruit." "Recruit?" "Make you part of their shift. Pull you from ours to theirs." Harlan's jaw tightened. Derek followed a light that wasn't on anyone's head. He answered a radio call that no living person made. He walked into their space thinking it was ours. And now he's on their crew, wherever the hell that is. I thought of Derek disappearing around that bend in the crosscut, following the orange light, the sound of his lamp switching off, the silence. "The rules," I said. "They're boundaries, ways to tell the shifts apart." "Exactly. Follow your own light, not theirs. Don't answer knocking, that's not human. Don't respond to voices from unlit areas. The rules keep you on our crew. Break them and you start crossing over." Harlan picked up a coffee mug, his hand steady despite what he was saying. Pike figured most of it out through trial and error. Lost 3 more men doing it. But by the time he retired in the 80s, he had a working system. The rules got added to the official safety protocols as a, let's call it an underground addendum. The company doesn't acknowledge them, but they don't stop us from using them either. Easier to have weird rules than explain the turnover. I pulled out my laminated card and laid it on the table. There are gaps. Rule 2, Rule 4, Rule 6, they're missing. Harlan glanced at the card. Some rules worked for a while, then stopped working, or became obsolete when we changed operations. Pike used to have a rule about not using the hardline phones after midnight. But we don't have hardline phones anymore, so it doesn't matter. The rules evolve. What matters is following the ones we have now. Tell me the rest, I said. Everything Pike learned, everything you've learned. Because I'm going back down there tonight and I want to know what I'm dealing with. Harlan studied me for a long moment, then he sighed, a sound like air escaping from deep places. All right, here's what you need to understand. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. The other crew, they're not malicious. They're not monsters or demons, they're just lost. They died doing their jobs and some part of them never stopped. They're still trying to work the shift, still trying to complete whatever tasks they had. But they can't do it alone. They're understaffed, you see. 11 men can't run a full night operation, so when they sense someone from our crew nearby, they try to call them over, offer them a task, get them to help. And if you help, then you're on their crew and you don't come back to ours. Harlan's eyes were bleak. It's not violent. It's just recruitment. You start working with them and eventually you realize you can't find the cage anymore. Can't find the surface. Because you're working a level that doesn't have a way up. I absorbed that, the horror of it settling in my chest. Not a monster attacking you. Just a job you couldn't leave with coworkers who didn't know they were dead. There's more, Harlan said. One more rule Pike added late in his notes but never put on the official card because he thought it might cause panic. I'm telling you now because you're smart enough to see what's happening here and I don't want to lose you like we lost Derek. He leaned even closer until I could smell coffee and rock dust on his breath. If the cage starts moving on its own and you didn't punch the button, don't get in. Let it go. Doesn't matter if someone's screaming for help from inside. Doesn't matter what you hear. That cage isn't going to surface. It's going to the lower winds. And if you ride it down, you'll be on their crew before you even realize you crossed over. The words hung in the air between us. A rule about a moving cage, about ignoring screams for help, about watching someone be taken and doing nothing. Has that happened? I asked. Twice. Once in Pike's time, once about 10 years ago. Both times someone got in a cage that moved on its own. Both times we found the cage back on the surface an hour later, empty. The miners were never found. Harlan straightened. So you remember that, Reyes? Our shift uses the button. Their shift doesn't. I nodded, committing it to memory. Another rule, unwritten but vital. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I'd read Pike's notebook. Why do we keep working here? Why doesn't the company just shut it down? Harlan's smile was bitter. Because the ore is still valuable. Because people need jobs. Because officially none of this exists. Just a few unfortunate accidents over the years, and because... He paused. Because we've learned how to coexist. The rules work, most of the time. As long as you follow them, you go home. It's only when someone breaks them or doesn't believe them that things go bad. Like Derek, I thought. Like Tommy Vickers in 1972. Like many others over the decades who thought the rules were jokes or superstition. One more thing, Harlan said, standing and picking up his tray. If you ever find your name on a roster for the Lower Winds crew, or if you hear someone refer to you as working down there, don't go underground again. Ever. It means they think you're one of theirs. And if they think it, it's only a matter of time before it becomes true. He walked away, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the laminated card that suddenly felt like a fragile shield against something vast and patient. That night, descending in the cage, I felt the weight of all those eyes from the past. Pike, the 11 buried miners, Tommy Vickers, Derek, and countless others. All of them pulled into a shift that never ended, working stone that never gave them rest. I held my rule card tight and promised myself I would follow every word, because I had no intention of joining the other crew. 3 nights later, I learned that knowing the rules and following them are two different things when your humanity is being tested. It was a quiet shift, or as quiet as any shift in Silver Verge could be. Luis and I were assigned to Level 3 for routine inspection work. Harlan and Thomas were on Level 2 handling some equipment maintenance. Ray was on the surface managing the hoist and monitoring the systems, standard night crew operations. Around 10:30, Luis got a call on his radio about a malfunctioning ventilation fan on Level 2. "I need to go help Harlan with this," he said, checking his gear. "You good to finish the bolt checks on your own?" "Yeah, I'm good. Don't wander. Stay in the main drift. I'll be back in 45 minutes. He headed toward the cage station, his lamp beam swinging away into the dark. I continued working along Level 3, moving from support to support, tapping bolts and listening to the reassuring ring of solid metal. My lamp beam was a bubble of light in the encompassing darkness. The silence was broken only by my own breathing, the clink of my hammer and the occasional drip of water. The work was meditative. I found myself relaxing, falling into the rhythm of the task. For a while, I could almost forget about the other crew, about the rules, about Derek. Then around 11:10, I finished my section and started back toward the cage station to meet Luis. That's when I heard the sound, a mechanical groan echoing through the shaft. The rattle of cable, the squeal of metal on metal. The cage was moving. I reached the station just as the elevator came into view, descending from above. The cables were taut, the motor whining. But the control panel on the wall beside me showed no active call, no button pressed. The system status light was dark. The cage was moving on its own. It shuddered to a stop at Level 3, the gate rattling. Through the metal mesh, I could see the empty interior, just the bare wooden floor and the cable drum above. Then I heard the voices. They came from below, from the darkness of the shaft beneath the cage. Panicked, overlapping, desperate. "Help! Someone help us! We're trapped! The drift collapsed! Send the cage down! Please, we need the cage! Water's rising, for God's sake, send it down!" The voices were male, multiple speakers, their words tumbling over each other in awe, fear, and urgency. They sounded real. They sounded human. They sounded exactly like trapped miners calling for rescue. My hand moved toward the cage gate before I'd even thought about it. Every instinct in my body screamed to help them, to open the gate, to send the cage down, to pull whoever was trapped up to safety. These were my co-workers, my crew. You don't abandon your crew. I grabbed the gate latch, then I stopped. The rule. The one Harlan had told me in the mess hall, the one too terrifying to put on the official card. If the cage starts moving on its own and you didn't punch the button, don't get in. Let it go. But that rule was about getting in the cage. These voices were asking me to send it down. That was different, wasn't it? They needed help. They were trapped. What kind of person hears someone screaming for help and does nothing? "Please!" One of the voices broke through the others, clearer now. Young, terrified. "The water's at our waist. Send the cage. We're at the bottom of the shaft." My radio. I could call Harlan to confirm if there was really an emergency. My hand went to the radio clipped to my chest, but as I raised it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. One of the voices from below, still panicked, still begging, "Reyes, Noah, we know you're up there. Send the cage down. Help us." They knew my name. I stared at the dark shaft below the cage. The voices continued, now calling specifically to me, pleading, growing more desperate. But none of my current crew was down there. Harlan was on 2. Luis was on 2. Thomas was on 2. Ray was on the surface. Who was calling my name from below level 3? I pulled out my radio with shaking hands. "Harlan, this is Noah. You got anyone below level 3 right now?" A pause. Then, "Negative. Everyone's accounted for up here. Why? What's wrong?" The cage. I looked at the elevator, still sitting motionless at my level, and the gate closed. The cage moved on its own, and I'm hearing voices from below. Another pause, longer this time. When Harlan spoke again, his voice was tight. "Step away from the cage, Noah, right now. Don't touch it. Don't send it anywhere. There are people down there. They're saying they're trapped. There's no one down there, not on our shift." Harlan's voice was firm. "Check the board. What does it show?" I looked at the control panel on the wall. The status display showed the cage position clearly. Surface. According to the system, the elevator was still topside, hadn't moved at all. But I was looking right at it, sitting at level 3. "It shows surface," I said quietly. "That's where it is, Noah. What you're seeing at level 3, that's not our cage, that's theirs." The voices below were still calling. But now I heard other things mixed in. The echo of the words, slightly off time, like they were repeating from a distance. The absence of any mechanical sound. No pump running. No water sloshing. The way some of the voices sounded was older, with accents and phrasing that didn't match modern speech. One voice cutting through the others. Derek Lyons? Is that you up there? We've been waiting for you, man. Send the cage down." Derek. They were calling for Derek, but Derek had disappeared days ago. Unless he wasn't missing. Unless he was down there with them, working their shift now, calling up to the next recruit. My hand fell away from the gate. "Noah?" Harlan's voice on the radio. "Now talk to me. What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said, my voice rough. "I'm walking away." "Good. Get to the main drift and wait for Luis. Don't go near that cage again." I backed away from the elevator, my lamp beam fixed on it. The voices below were changing now, the desperation curdling into something else. Frustration, anger. "Coward. We needed help. You're leaving us to die. You'll be down here soon enough, Reyes. Then you'll understand." The gate rattled violently as if someone inside was shaking it, even though the cage was clearly empty. The whole frame shuddered. Then with a screech of cable, the elevator began to descend, dropping into the darkness below level 3, below level 4, below the bottom of the active mine, going to the lower winds, to the levels that had been sealed since 1972. I watched it disappear into the black, the voices fading with it. The cable kept playing out, going down, 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 far below where any active level existed. Then silence. The shaft was empty, just a dark, vertical tunnel with no elevator. I stood there, shaking, my heart hammering. I'd almost done it. Almost opened that gate, almost sent the cage down, almost helped them. Would that have pulled me onto their crew? Or just made me complicit and accomplice to whatever they were doing down there? A minute later, the radio crackled, raised voice from the surface. "Hey, Harlan, you called the cage? I'm showing it at the surface, but the call button was pressed from underground." "Nobody called it," Harlan responded. "Leave it where it is." I walked back to the main drift on unsteady legs and sat down on a supply crate, waiting for Luis. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd followed the rule, barely, but it felt like the worst thing I'd ever done. Those voices had sounded so real, so desperate, but they'd known my name. They'd called for Derek. And the cage they wanted me to send down had been heading to a level that shouldn't exist. When Luis finally returned, he found me sitting in the dark, still trembling. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like hell." "Just tired," I lied. "Long night." But it wasn't tiredness. It was the sick feeling of realizing that the rules weren't just about survival. They were about making impossible choices, about ignoring every human instinct to help, to respond, to connect. Because on some shifts, helping meant joining. And I'd almost chosen wrong. The next 2 nights passed in tense silence. I worked my shifts, followed my rules, and tried not to think about the voices I'd heard from the shaft. But something had changed. The mine knew I was aware now. The other crew knew I could hear them, could see their lights, and they were getting more persistent. On my next rotation, working level 3 with Luis, I started seeing more of them. The extra lights appeared more frequently, drifting in peripheral vision. I heard knocking from sealed crosscuts, rhythmic and purposeful. Twice I found fresh tool marks on rock walls in areas we hadn't worked. Gouges and scratches that looked recent, but no one from our crew had been there. Luis noticed my tension. "You're seeing things," he said quietly as we checked ventilation on the main drift. "Aren't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I did too, the first few months," he admitted. "The extra lights, the sounds. You learn to ignore it. Follow the rules, keep your head down, and it stays manageable." "Does it ever stop?" Luis was quiet for a moment. "No, but you get better at telling the shifts apart, better at knowing which sounds are ours and which are theirs." That night, around 11 o'clock, the tremors started. They were small at first, just a vibration in the rock, a subtle shaking that made dust fall from the ceiling and tools rattle against the walls. But over the course of an hour, they grew stronger. The company had mentioned something about seismic activity in the region, small quakes from the mountains settling. Normal, they said, nothing to worry about. But by 11:40, the tremors were concerning enough that Harlan made the call to evacuate. "All crew, this is Briggs. We're pulling everyone out until these tremors settle. Head to the cage stations and come up in order, level 2 first, then 3, then 4. Luis and I started packing our gear. Around us, the rock groaned and popped. The overhead lights swayed on their cables. "Noah, Luis," Harlan's voice crackled again. "Before you come up, I need you to do a final sweep of level 4. Make sure everyone's out. Thomas and Ray should have come up already, but I'm not seeing them on the board." Luis keyed his radio. "Copy that. We'll check 4 and report." We took the cage down 1 level, the descent accompanied by the unsettling sound of rock shifting around us. Level 4 was dimmer than usual. Some of the work lights had shaken loose or blown out. Our cap lamps carved small bubbles of visibility in the encompassing dark. "Thomas? Ray?" Luis called out as we moved along the main drift. "You guys down here?" No answer. Just the echo of Luis's voice and the intermittent rumble of tremors. We walked deeper into the drift, checking side tunnels and equipment stations. Everything was abandoned, properly shut down. But there was no sign of Thomas or Ray. "This is weird," Luis muttered. "Their gear's not here. They must have already gone up." I was about to agree when I saw the lights. Not our lights, not normal. These were multiple orange glows appearing ahead of us in the drift, swaying slightly like a line of miners walking. 4, 5, maybe 6 lights moving in formation toward us. Luis saw them too. He stopped walking, his hand going to his radio. That's when our radios erupted with static and voices. "Luis, Noah, we need help in the eastern stope. There's a gas leak at the crosscut. Someone get down here." We're pinned near the old survey station. Beam collapsed. Reyes, this is Thomas. We're trapped. Come toward the lights. Overlapping voices, some clear, some distorted. Some sound like our current crew, others are older, using terminology and phrasing from decades past. The radio was chaos, a dozen conversations happening at once. Luis pulled his radio off his belt, staring at it. That's not... I don't think... Another tremor hit, stronger this time. The rock groaned. Dust fell in sheets. Somewhere in the darkness, timber cracked with a sound like a gunshot. My radio. Noah Reyes, this is Harlan. Get Luis and get to the cage now. Don't respond to any calls. I'm looking at the board. Thomas and Ray signed out 20 minutes ago. They're already on the surface. If Thomas and Ray were on the surface, then who was calling their names on the radio? Who was asking for help? The lights ahead of us multiplied. Now there were 8, 10, 12, too many for any night crew. They formed a rough semicircle, blocking the main drift ahead. Behind us, I heard the distant sound of the cage moving, its cables rattling. We need to go, I said, grabbing Luis's arm. Now, back to the cage. But the calls, they're not ours. We turned and ran back toward the station, our lamps bouncing wildly. The drift seemed longer than it had on the way in, the shadows deeper. Behind us, I heard footsteps, multiple sets, boots on stone, pacing us. But when I glanced back, there was no one. Just the swaying orange lights following. We reached the cage station and my stomach dropped. The elevator was there, gate open, waiting. But the control board on the wall showed a different story. Cage position, lower winds, system offline. According to the board, there was no cage at level 4. According to my eyes, it was right in front of me, ready to take us up. Come on, Luis started toward it. I grabbed his shoulder. Wait, look at the board. He looked, his face going pale. But it's right there. That's not our cage, Luis, that's theirs. From inside the waiting elevator came a voice. Multiple voices actually overlapping. Get in. We'll take you up. The rock's failing. You need to evacuate. Come on, we're waiting for you. Luis, Noah, get in the damn cage. Luis's hand was trembling on the gate. Every survival instinct we had was screaming at us to get in, to escape the failing level, to get to safety. The tremors were getting worse. The mine was actively groaning around us. But Harlan's unwritten rule echoed in my head. If the cage starts moving on its own and you didn't punch the button, don't get in. We're not getting in, I said firmly. We take the long route. What long route? Luis's voice was panicked. This is the only... There's an emergency ladder in the shaft. Old access. It'll take longer, but it goes to the surface. I'd seen it on the old maps, a backup system installed decades ago. It was still there. Had to be. The voices from the cage grew more insistent. You're running out of time. The drift's going to collapse. Don't be stupid, get in. Then cutting through the others, a voice I recognized. Derek's voice, clear and desperate. Noah, please, I don't want to be alone down here, just get in. It's okay, we're waiting for you. My chest tightened. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost reached for that gate. Then another tremor hit, and I saw something that made my decision final. Through the cage mesh, in the dim glow of the orange lights inside, I saw shadows. Man-shaped, standing in the elevator, even though the floor looked empty. Shadows with old-fashioned hard hats and positions that didn't match the sway of the lights. One of the shadows turned toward me, and for just a second I saw a face. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, desperate. Not alive, not dead. Something in between, still working the shift. Come on! I pulled Luis away from the cage toward the far end of the station where the old shaft access ladder was bolted to the wall. Behind us, the cage gate slammed shut with a bang. The elevator began to descend, dropping past level 4 into the darkness below, carrying its cargo of shadow workers back to the lower winds. We found the ladder. Old iron rungs bolted into the shaft wall, leading upward into the darkness. It was narrow, rusty, and terrifying. But it was ours. It was real. "Climb," I said. "Don't stop, don't look down." We climbed. Rung after rung, Luis above me, my arms burning, my breath ragged. Below us, the lights of the other crew gathered at the shaft bottom, orange glows swaying like they were watching us leave. Above us, nothing but darkness and the hope that the ladder would actually reach the surface. It took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of climbing blind, of trusting each rung would hold, of ignoring the voices that still called from below. But finally, we hauled ourselves up through an old access hatch and collapsed on the surface, under the cold stars, gasping and shaking. Harlan was there, along with Ray and Thomas, very much alive and accounted for. They pulled us away from the hatch, slammed it shut, and secured it with fresh locks. "You didn't get in the cage," Harlan said. "It wasn't a question." "No," I managed. "We climbed." He nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. "Good. That cage wouldn't have taken you to the surface. It would have taken you to join Derek." We stood there in the cold desert air, listening to the distant sounds of the mine, machinery, ventilation, the settling of rock. But I knew now that those weren't the only sounds down there. There were others, voices and footsteps and the clank of tools from shifts that never ended. And they were always recruiting. The company suspended night operations for a week after the tremors, bringing in engineers to assess structural stability. The official report declared the mine safe to continue work. The unofficial reality was that 3 more miners quit the night crew, unwilling to go back down after what they'd experienced during the evacuation. I should have been one of them. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to walk away, to find any other job, any other way to pay my father's debts. But something kept me anchored to Silver Verge. Maybe it was the money, still the best pay I could find. Maybe it was pride, not wanting to be beaten by something I couldn't fully explain. Or maybe, and this was the thought that kept me awake at night, I felt tethered to the mine now. Like I'd been seen by the other crew, marked by them, and leaving wouldn't actually free me. When night operations resumed, I reported for my shift. Harlan pulled me aside before we descended. "You sure about this, Reyes? No shame in walking? You've earned the choice." "I'm sure," I lied. He studied my face, then handed me something, a new laminated card. This one had 9 rules instead of 7. Rules 1, 3, 5, and 7 were the same, but at the bottom, in what looked like freshly printed text, were 2 new additions. Rule 8. If the board shows the cage in a location that doesn't match what you see, do not enter it. Rule 9. If the roster ever lists your name under Lower Windsor crew, you are already on the wrong shift. Do not go underground again. "We added these after what happened," Harlan said quietly. "Your experience, Luis's. We update the rules when we learn something new. That's how we survive." I pocketed the card. "Has anyone ever been listed on the wrong roster?" "Rule 9? Harlan's face darkened. "Twice that I know of. Both times the miner insisted they could still work. Both times." He shook his head. "They went down for a normal shift and never came back up. We'd find them on the security footage, walking right past the cage station like they didn't see it, heading deeper into the mine, following something we couldn't see on camera." "Jesus. So you check that roster every time you sign in. And if your name ever appears where it shouldn't, you walk away and don't look back." He gripped my shoulder. "You understand?" "I understand." That night, working level 3 with Luis and a new guy named Marcus, I felt hyper-aware of everything. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker in my peripheral vision. The mine felt more crowded than it should, like the space between the shifts was thinner. I caught glimpses of the orange lights more frequently, heard knocking from abandoned sections. Once passing a sealed crosscut, I heard what sounded like men laughing, old laughter echoing from impossible places. But I followed the rules. I ignored the sounds. I walked only by my own light. I responded to no voices from unlit areas, and I went home at the end of my shift. This became my routine. Days passed, then weeks. I learned to function with the constant awareness of the other crew the way you might learn to live next to a graveyard or a battlefield. They were there, always there, working their eternal shift just beyond the boundary of my perception. But as long as I followed the rules, as long as I kept to my side of that boundary, I could coexist with them. Luis told me it would get easier. He was wrong. It never got easier. But it did become normal, in the way that abnormal things become normal when you're exposed to them long enough. I worked at Silver Verge for 6 more months, paid down a significant chunk of my father's debt, slept poorly but functioned, became one of the veterans, the miners who knew the rules and followed them without question. But I never stopped dreaming about the mine. In my sleep, I walked different versions of Level 4 where the drifts extended forever and the crew I passed all had hollow eyes and outdated equipment. I'd wake up sometimes convinced I'd heard the cage moving on its own, rattling outside my barracks window. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid, more insistent. And then one morning I found something that made my blood run cold. I'd arrived early for the shift and went to sign in on the roster clipboard outside the foreman's office. Standard procedure. You write your name, the time, and which level you're assigned to. I picked up the pen and looked down at the paper. My name was already there, not in the spot where I should sign for tonight's shift. Further down the page in a section I'd never noticed before. A section labeled Lower Winds Crew, Level 6. Noah Reyes, cap lamp number 4, in service. Since 1972, the pen fell from my hand. I stared at the entry, my heart hammering. The ink looked fresh. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it wasn't anyone else's I recognized either. It was just there, like it had always been there. Rule 9. If the roster ever lists your name under Lower Winds Crew, you are already on the wrong shift. Do not go underground again. I walked away from the office without signing in, went straight to Harlan's quarters and knocked until he answered, bleary-eyed from sleep. I need to show you something, I said. We walked back to the roster together. But when Harlan looked at the clipboard, his face, confused, I realized he didn't see what I saw. To him, the page only showed the normal entries, the current night crew, all properly listed for levels 2, 3, and 4. The Lower Winds entry was gone, or maybe it had never been there for anyone but me. What am I supposed to be seeing? Harlan asked. I couldn't speak for a moment, then quietly, nothing. I think I need to take some time off. Harlan studied me, understanding slowly dawning in his eyes. Yeah, he said softly. I think that's a good idea. I packed my things that day, turned in my gear, collected my pay, and drove away from Silver Verge without looking back. The relief I felt leaving that compound was overwhelming, like surfacing from deep water, like escaping from a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me. I found work in Las Vegas, lower pay but above ground. Started seeing a therapist about the nightmares. Slowly, over weeks and months, the dreams faded. The constant awareness of the other crew, the feeling of being watched by hollow eyes, gradually diminished. But I never forgot. And I never stopped checking rosters, even on construction sites, even in offices, making sure my name only appeared where it should. Because once you've been marked by the other crew, once they've tried to recruit you, some part of you never fully leaves that mine. You carry it with you. A shadow shift running parallel to your life, waiting for the moment you slip and cross over. I still have the laminated card. Keep it in my wallet even though I'll never work underground again. Sometimes I take it out and read the rules, remembering each one's price, each one's lesson written in disappeared minors and impossible choices. And sometimes, late at night, I think I hear it. Knocking. Slow and rhythmic, 3 beats. Then silence. Then 3 more. Coming from no particular direction. From everywhere and nowhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the spaces between. Knock. 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 I never answer. I never will. 3 months after I left Silver Verge, I got a call from Luis. I was surprised to hear from him. We'd exchanged numbers, but I hadn't expected we'd stay in touch. The mine was something I was trying to put behind me. "How have you been?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that told me this wasn't a social call. "Good. Better. Working in Vegas now. You?" "Still at Silver Verge. We've got a new hire. Young woman, mid-20s. Name's Casey." He paused. "She reminds me of Derek, Noah. Confident. Doesn't scare easily. Thinks the rules are hazing bullshit." My chest tightened. "Did you warn her?" Harlan gave her the card, gave her the talk. She laughed it off. Another pause. "Her first shift is tonight. I wanted to tell someone. In case." "In case what?" "In case she doesn't come back up." We were both silent for a moment. Then Luis said, "You did well getting out, Noah. Don't come back, not even to visit." "I won't," I promised. "Take care of yourself." The line went dead. I tried not to think about it, tried to tell myself Casey would be fine, that most people who followed the rules survived, that she'd learn quickly as I had. But I couldn't shake the image of her descending into that shaft, confident and skeptical, carrying a laminated card she didn't believe in. That night I dreamed about Silver Verge for the first time in weeks. In the dream, I was standing on the surface, watching the cage descend with its load of night crew. Through the mesh, I could see Casey, young and eager, her new hard hat gleaming. Next to her stood Derek, his face pale, his cap lamp burning that familiar orange. And behind them, pressed into the shadows of the cage, I saw others. Indistinct figures, too many to count, all waiting patiently for the elevator to reach the lower winds. I woke up in a cold sweat. 2 days later, Luis called again. His voice was tight. "Casey's missing." "What happened?" "She lasted 2 shifts following the rules. Then on the 3rd night, she told Marcus she heard her sister calling from one of the sealed crosscuts. Marcus told her to ignore it and reminded her about Rule 7, but Casey insisted her sister was in trouble, that the voice sounded exactly right." Luis's breath was shaky. "She walked into an unmarked side tunnel on level 4. Marcus tried to stop her, but she said, You can't fake family, that's really her." And she never came back out. They searched for 6 hours, found her hard hat near a collapse from the 60s. Nobody, no Casey, just her hat and 1 boot sitting on stone like she'd stepped out of them, and kept walking. I closed my eyes. Another one. Despite the rules, despite the warnings, another recruit for the other crew. "Harlan's updating the card," Luis continued, "adding something about voices that mimic family, trying to close that loophole, but Noah." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's adapting. The other crew is learning what calls we'll respond to. Family, friends, things we can't ignore. The rules might not be enough anymore." "Then shut the mind down," I said, anger flaring. "Just seal it and walk away." "Company won't. Not while the ore has value. And honestly," Luis laughed bitterly, "I don't think it would matter. I think that lower winds is running its shift whether we're here or not. Whether the company keeps mining or abandons the place, those 11 men and everyone who's joined them since are still down there, still working. We're just the ones who get too close." We talked for a few more minutes, but there wasn't much else to say. Casey was gone. The mine remained open. And somewhere deep in the sealed levels beneath Silver Verge, the other crew had gained another member. After we hung up, I took out my laminated card and added a handwritten note in the margin next to Rule 7. This includes family voices. They can mimic anyone. I didn't know if I'd ever need it again. But if I did, I wanted to remember Casey's mistake. Wanted to remember that the other crew was patient, intelligent, and evolving. 3 weeks later, I saw the job posting. It showed up in my search results while I was looking for construction work, a sponsored ad that shouldn't have appeared based on my search terms. But there it was. Miners wanted. Silver Verge mine, Nevada high pay. Night shifts, experience preferred. Join our crew today. I stared at the ad, my mouth dry. The wording was slightly off. Join our crew. Not join our team or apply today. Our crew. I cleared my browser history and blocked the website, but the ad kept appearing. Different job boards, different search engines, always the same wording, always finding me. The mine was still recruiting. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, worn and yellowed, that looked like it had been torn from an old logbook. At the top, in faded ink, Silver Verge Lower Winds Crew Roster. Active personnel below is a list of names and dates. I recognized some of them from Josiah Pike's notebook. Others were more recent. Derek Lyons listed as in service since 2024. Casey Morrison, same date, and at the bottom in fresh ink that could have been added yesterday. Noah Reyes, Cap Lamptham 4, in service. Since 1972, my hands shook as I held the paper. This was impossible. I'd never worked the lower winds. I'd left the mine months ago. I was in Las Vegas above ground, living a normal life. But the roster said otherwise. According to this document, I'd been working the lower winds for over 50 years, since 1972, since the year of the collapse that buried the original 11. I burned the paper immediately, watching it curl and blacken in my apartment sink, flushed the ashes, tried to pretend I'd never seen it. But that night, the knocking returned, loud and insistent. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats coming from the walls of my apartment, from the floor, from the ceiling. And underneath it, faint but unmistakable, I heard Derek's voice. Noah, we're still down here, still working. We need you, just come back. Complete your shift. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the lights on. I avoid basements, underground parking, and anything below the surface. I check every roster I sign, every document that has my name, making sure it doesn't list me somewhere I've never been. But I know the truth. I saw their cage, I heard their calls, I was marked. And somewhere beneath the Nevada desert, in a level that was sealed decades ago, there's a crew working an endless shift. They're understaffed, they're tired, and they're patient. They know I'll come back eventually. Maybe when I sleep, maybe when I'm not paying attention, maybe when I hear just the right voice, calling from just the right shadow. But I'll come back. Because once you're on their roster, once your name is written in the ledger of the lower winds crew, you're not really working surface anymore. You're just on loan. And sooner or later, the other shift calls you home. The knocking continues. I don't answer, but it's getting harder not to.